Welcome to another episode of the Film Florida podcast. My name is John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Thanks for downloading this episode of the podcast. We have a great guest for you today. Before I introduce you to our guest, though, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, rate, and review the Film Florida podcast. If you're not already a member, please consider joining Film Florida at filmflorida.org. And finally, we have a Film Florida merchandise page. Check it out at teespring.com/stores/Film Florida to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, and coffee mugs. Andrew Hevia is a filmmaker from Miami. He attended New World School for the Arts, then Florida State University's College of Motion Picture Arts. He is the co-founder of Miami's Borscht Film Festival and was the co-producer on Moonlight. His most recent project is a documentary called Leave the Bus Through the Broken Window. We talked to Andrew about getting his start in the industry, as well as what's next for him. Here's my conversation with Andrew Hevia. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start at the beginning. You attended New World School of the Arts in Miami, so you clearly wanted to express your creative side, but initially you studied drawing and painting. Talk about the interest you had at that time.
Sure. So I think I was about 11 when I started making short films with a video camera that my dad actually brought home from work. And my interest was in filmmaking, but it was at that point mostly animation because, one, I didn't have an army of friends to make movies with, and two, I had myself in my free time. So when I was 11, I actually went to R.R. Moten, which had a photography program. And I was thinking, like, there was no film program for kids at that age in Miami, so I was closer to cameras. I went into photography. Photography at Moten led me to Southwood, which was I stayed in the photography track, and then Southwood took me to New World. There was, I think, Dash later developed Design and Architecture Senior High, which is a high school in Miami, later developed a film program, but at the time, New World was the most art-focused, craft-focused art program in the county, and I went to New World to study drawing and painting, but with the goal of learning filmmaking. The story is actually that when I was young, I'd learned about storyboards, and it was like an incredible way to realize like movies were drawn before they were made. And then I heard a story about Ray Harryhausen, and he was the famous effects artist, the guy who he learned under Willis O'Brien, the guy who did King Kong, and went on to do the creature features and the Jason the Argonaut skeleton fight. And there was a story about Ray Harryhausen where he would draw a single frame of his creature feature, go to his producer's office and say, "Here's the new movie," and they'd look at that single drawing and say, "Here's the money, go make it." Wow. And I became so enamored with that idea. Like if I could draw my ideas, then I could make my movies.
So then when you got to high school, you co-founded the Borscht Film Festival. And so it seemed obvious from what you just said that you knew that film was eventually where you wanted to be. Talk about that migration and then the origin of the film festival.
Sure. Film was where I wanted to be. Film was where I was. Like, when I wasn't in school, I would be trying to make movies. And while I was in school, junior year, we got to the elective portion where you got to pick your photography or ceramics or printmaking. And the school was incredibly supportive because I was not shy about this. When I started, I said, this is what I want to do. And while I was there, is what I wanted to do. And what they had done is basically taken a computer that was reserved for the college level students and set it aside for me, put Final Cut Pro 1 or 2, whatever version of it, brand new, like nonlinear editing just had come out. Yep. And which meant I didn't have to do the VCR trick anymore, where you plug two VCRs in together and start, stop, record so you could edit your movies. And they'd given me that. So then in school time, I would be making movies, and some of them were extremely art focused, more Matthew Barney or David Lynch kind of inspired movies.
Okay.
And it turns out New World was a hotbed of creative people who liked doing interesting things. So there were other filmmakers in class, some of whom were interested from the art perspective. They were artists who wanted to get into the medium of film. Some of them were dancers. Some of them were theater students who saw the obvious, like, next jump. So there was always a collection of students of various ages who were willing to do it. And some underclassmen had started this sort of extracurricular film festival, which really meant we would give each other homework assignments. We'd basically seen the movie The Five Obstructions, the Lars von Trier movie. It's a phenomenal movie, but basically what the premise of the movie is that Lars von Trier goes to his old mentor, Jorgen Leith, who at this point in Jorgen Leith's career, he basically retired from filmmaking. And Lars von Trier shows up with the first film he'd ever made, Jorgen Leith had ever made, the most perfect short film called The Perfect Human. And he was like, I loved your movie. I want you to remake it. But this time, it was a beautiful black and white sort of poetic thing. He says, now it needs to be in color. And what would you make it like today? So he remakes the movie. He goes, okay, it's great, but I noticed you used a lot of long shots. And then now this new rule, you're going to remake it again a third time, but this time your shots can only be 15 seconds. So he keeps giving him these like hurdles he has to jump, these obstacles he has to overcome. And it forces him to be creative. Like he has to solve them as an artist, and it makes for a really engaging result. So in high school, we figured like this would be our thing. And we would give each other these really ridiculous obstructions that we would put in a hat, and he'd pull it and be like, oh no, I'm the guy who has to make a movie where I can't film anyone from the waist up. So it only is waist down. Or you're like, oh no, I'm the guy who can only do a movie with still images. And that forced us to sort of expand what we were thinking about in terms of filmmaking. It forced us to make these little, rinky-dink little short films that we'd put together over the weekend with our high school friends. And then we'd get together and show them basically in a living room. Like, hey, here are our movies. We'd watch them. It'd be a show and tell night every, 4 months. This would happen. But most of the students working it were younger than me. So I'd actually graduated and gone off to film school when this was still happening. So I'd send back movies. Then we got to a place where we were renting venues. And it wasn't until I graduated from film school, moved back to Miami, that it became a more serious focus.
Okay. But the origin started while you were in school.
Yeah, it was the same core collaborators. The truth is, when I left film school, most of my classmates went off to LA and went off to New York, and I didn't understand what I offered those cities. I was like, I don't see why LA is going to hire me over anybody else. I'm not connected there. I'm not wealthy enough to float. Like, while I meet all these people, and I don't have enough job experience for someone to hire me. Like, I'm at a severe disadvantage. And when I thought about where I wanted to go, because of these experiences with these friends of mine, this like process of making work, Miami felt like a creative place. It felt like a place I could go to make creative work. And if I made the right creative work, then I thought I could find sort of my voice as an artist.
Well, Andrew, you talked about attending film school, and you went to Florida State University College of Motion Picture Arts, who is a longtime great member of Film Florida, so we obviously love them. What drove you to FSU, and what was your big takeaway from your time there in school?
Well, so I went to FSU specifically because of the film school. That was my target. And what I had at the time, I'd looked at more art conservatories. A lot of my classmates from New World went to Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, or SMFA, the School of Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, which is where like David Lynch went, or the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where Ang Lee went. So like I was trying for these kind of places, and then realized there was an incredible opportunity in Florida. And the Florida State it's a really small program, so the odds of getting in were low, but I was able to finagle a spot. And the program was famous for being what they call a film school, like a filmmaking boot camp, because It's basically 2.5 years of 7-day-a-week filmmaking. And if you're not on set, you're in a classroom learning about set. And it was very focused on the process of making, which I really appreciated, because over the course of 2.5 years, I think I worked on 20 short films. Some I was directing, some I was the boom op, some I was production design, some I was just picking up heavy things and putting them down. Like, it didn't matter what my role was. I was involved in a lot. And through that, understood the machinery in a way that I think kind of shifted my perspective, because I started to fall in love with the process. And less about the project. You're like, well, there's an easy way to make this. What if I do this, this, this? And the more I became interested in the process, the more I saw the whole thing as sort of an engineering problem, which just really appealed to a certain part of me.
So then you graduated from FSU in 2006, and you followed what appears to be a pretty typical path for a new filmmaker. You had some shorts, you had some independent films. Talk about those early years after graduation, building the foundation for your career. What stands out from that time? So
I graduated film school 2006. It was December. Florida State has a weird staggered year, so you get kicked out at the end of the calendar year, not the regular semester break. What I did is I moved back to Miami because I needed to sort of get my stuff together, and I liked this idea of Miami being a creative city. But I struggled to find work. Like, I didn't know, like, one, you're a graduate, like, hey, you're fresh out of college. I didn't go to school in Miami, so I didn't know the people who would employ me. So I find a job on Craigslist in Boca, where I am one of like 15 editors sitting at it in a row, like we're an assembly line for a wedding videographer. And he goes out and shoots these videos and then delivers footage to these editors. And what we do is assemble them to template. And I mean, there's like a pre-built editing timeline, and there's a title card that says shot of bride, 5 seconds, shot of groom, 3 seconds. And it's pre-cut to music, and you just have to go through the footage, find it. And it's like an idiot-proof system. But he had all these incredible rules, and the rules would be like you had to put so many different filters. Every shot needed a new filter. And he would wander up and down the hallway with all of the editors working, saying things like, slow motion is emotion. Remember, cut on the beat. And would give us these rules. And it was like, I'm sitting in this farm, like, what is this? What has happened to my life? This is not what I dreamed. So I realized that the Tri-Rail connected to the Metro Rail. The Metro Rail was like a mile or so from my parents' house. So I could actually take the Metro to the Tri-Rail and take the Tri-Rail up to Boca. And then there was a bus, or I could walk. It was like half a mile to the actual office. And I realized that the public transit system in South Florida doesn't work for everybody. But in theory, it would work for me. So I would take this thing up, and it would take 2 hours instead of the 45 minutes it would take by car. But I was really committed to like the infrastructure, man. And I was reading a book called What is the What, which was written by Dave Eggers, who was an author I was already in love with. But the book is so emotionally affecting that I'm openly crying on the train, so much so that I can't see the words on the page. I'm like wiping the tears from my eyes. And I finished the book, and at that moment realized that I have to go to San Francisco to work for this guy, because the work that he's doing both as an artist and within the community is the kind of work I want to be a part of. What I mean by that is the story of Dave Eggers. I'm going to go on a detour. You can cut all this if you need to. I'm going to go on a detour about Dave Eggers, where he wanted to produce work. And his most famous book is a book called A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. And in that book, he's living in San Francisco, and he's trying to make a magazine. And it's a memoir about sort of the family trauma and all this horrible stuff that's happened, and sort of finding hope and moving on past grief. It's an incredible book. And while he's making this magazine, what he realizes, he's over-indexing on super educated MFA writing level people, and they're all in this gentrifying community just sort of squatting while they make like what could be seen as frivolous projects. And he realizes there's a way for them to help the community, because he's got all these incredibly smart people who've got extra time on their hands. And why not open a tutoring center for the community? Like, why not actually give back to the neighborhood that they're sort of squatting in? And this leads to something called the 826 Valencia is the address. And that becomes a place where after school lets out, they let the kids come by with their parents. They sit down and they teach them, they go over their writing homework. Like, hey, maybe we can help you. Like, I'm super educated here. I got some free time. And this becomes a regular tutoring center where they help kids with their homework after school. And they eventually like get really interested in this idea and mock up a fake retail front. So they open up a retail outlet, and the law in San Francisco in this area says you have to have a retail outlet. So they open up retail, not tutoring. And the retails, they sell pirate supplies.
Okay.
So like eye patches and peg legs and, hooks, like Captain Hook. If you need to buy nets, they have that. Bags of sand or like treasure maps. It's a bunch of novelty items for the contemporary pirate, in a very cartoonish sort of Robert Louis Stevenson kind of pirate. And then in the back, once they satisfy the legal requirement, in the back they have a tutoring center. So kids come in, kids play with the pirate stuff, and then they go back and do their homework. And they realize they can upsell all of these things. So like if it's a silver peg leg and it costs $50, and all of that money supports a tutoring center. So they hire a staff and they start building this thing out. And he's focused his community around this idea. And then a young man named Valentino Achek-Deng, who at the time is a refugee from Sudan, who had been one of the lost boys of Sudan, which is a long story I don't think I'm going to go into, but has arrived in the U.S. Horrible things are going on at home. No one is talking about the plight of the Sudanese, let alone the lost boys of Sudan. So on a whim, Valentino Achek-Deng, a refugee who barely speaks the language, calls up Dave Eggers and says, hey, I need to get my story out there. You are a writer who writes books. How about you write my story. And Dave Eggers, Pulitzer Prize finalist, doing all this stuff, says, okay. And then he flies to Atlanta where Valentino is, and he interviews him and turns that into like a fictionalized autobiography, meaning he's displacing his own voice, speaking in the voice of Valentino, and then using that format to expand on background, history, culture. So it's an incredibly emotional and affecting testament from Valentino's point of view of what he went through, but also a readable essay and dissertation on what's going on there. And it's an incredible marriage of these things. And I'm reading this book in Boca, weeping openly because it's so emotional. I go, the man who figured out how to do this, who managed to make community work and necessary, powerful work out of his art, which is still experimental and adventurous and emotional, is someone I want to meet. I want to work, whatever this guy's doing, I want to do it too. So I moved to San Francisco to go work for that company. At the time, McSweeney's had just launched something called Wolfen, which was a DVD magazine of rare and unseen short films. Now, remember, this is 2006, 2007. YouTube came out in 2006.
Right.
So the internet is a thing, but no one knows how to do anything with it yet. So what McSweeney's is doing through Wolfen is they are going around to film festivals. They're picking up short films that are playing festivals and then nowhere else, and they're distributing them by DVD, by mail order DVD. And they're curating this weird collection of movies that include everything from, the guy who was directing episodes of House would get his actresses together, his friends together, and they all happen to be famous actresses, and they would make a short film in their backyard. And he has footage of a giant squid giving birth that had just been discovered by meteorologists and never seen before, next to the Turkish version of Married with Children, where the subtitles have been replaced by the writers of The Daily Show. Right? It's like the coolest thing, especially for me at this age. It's like the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And I get to be a part of that and be one of the interns and become like an associate editor there, like assembling and flying places, trying to find weird short films. And it's a dream come true while I'm doing this work. And what I'm doing while I'm thinking this is San Francisco is wonderful, but I don't live here. I live in Miami. I'm from Miami. And why doesn't Miami have these things? So while I'm doing all this in San Francisco, it's a really wonderful summer, and totally by happenstance, a man named Barry Jenkins is in San Francisco putting together his first feature film, a movie called Medicine for Melancholy. Now, Barry Jenkins went to Florida State.
Right.
And Barry was several years ahead of me at Florida State, but his entire crew are all Florida State alums, and they're all various years of Florida State alums. And the co-producer of that movie is a woman named Sherry Salter, and Sherry Salter was not only my year at Florida State, she was one of my best friends. And she's producing this little movie. And what I got really excited by was suddenly I had all these film school classmates who, instead of going to Hollywood to get a job and work in the industry, raised like $8,000 and started making a feature. And I was really inspired by this because here are the students who learned what we learned, how to make things, and they just went ahead and made it. So I became really inspired by this and spent a lot of time around their production, just very aware of it, asking questions, found the sound guy, how do you do it, how do you support yourself, found the editor, how you do it, how do you support yourself, found the producer, how, Justin Barber, how do you do it, how do you support yourself, and then found Barry. And Barry had a fascinating story that really inspired me, but even more than that, Barry was from Miami, and it really struck me that Barry was from Miami and he was making a movie about San Francisco. And something felt really off about that. And I got really inspired to do what was happening in San Francisco with Miami people and go back to Miami and try to do that.
So that answers the question as to how you got kind of connected to Moonlight. So when you guys all came together to do Moonlight, what were your initial expectations? What did you see the potential being for that film?
Moonlight connected all of my worlds because Terrell McCraney had gone to New World School of the Arts. Right. And in a lot of ways, he was several years ahead of me, but he was someone who you were aware of his work and you knew that he was writing at a level far beyond like high school. He was doing incredible work at the time. So his reputation sort of preceded him. And when I was in film school, Barry occupied that same space. It's like you knew these guys were on to something. So you wanted to know, like, hey, what are you doing that everyone else isn't doing? This is pretty cool. So when I was back in Miami making all this Miami focus, trying to make all this Miami focus work and making all this noise about telling local stories, Raul had basically approached and said, hey, I've got this project I wrote that I think could be a Miami story. What do you think of it? And it was a play he'd written called In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue, which was a story set in Miami, set in Liberty City, very personal to him. And I personally knew it was something wonderful, but I didn't know who else could do it except Barry. So in 2011, I had been trying now 4 years to get Barry back to Miami to make something. And in 2011, through Borscht and through a Knight Foundation grant, I was able to get Barry back to Miami to make a short film called Chlorophyll. And
Sure.
Chlorophyll was something we made in 3 days for like $2,000.
Wow.
And it was the first film Barry had made in Miami ever, because when he grew up in Miami, filmmaking wasn't an interest of his. And while we were making that, I was whispering in his ear the whole time, "You should come back and make a feature." And then I had Terrell give me the script, so I passed it on to Barry and was like, "I think this is the movie. But maybe this is a movie you can make. Like, who knows?" My expectation at the time, to answer the question you actually asked, was that we could make this movie for $50 in Miami in the way that he'd made Medicine, because I knew Barry could make a movie for pocket change, make a beautiful movie for pocket change. And I thought this idea of regional, community-focused storytelling was something that really intrigued me, because the thing I'd learned from Dave Eggers, and the thing that the Knight Foundation still in Miami really advocates for, is community through art, is that you can connect those two things. And I realized, like, sports teams, people understand sports for this way. Like, no, you rally around the Marlins, that's the Miami team, or these are the Dolphins, and people come together, and thousands of people get together, and they cheer and they support their community through a sports team. And the team will go and travel, and you'll be like, "I represent Miami." And what was always so strange to me is that that didn't exist in an art context, and it could, because art can also unite people if you tell the right stories, and the stories of a community, the stories about a people. It's why, frankly, we tell stories at all. And I mean, we, like, humanity. You know, how many of the things that unite us, even things like sports, you learn the story of the sports team. So why not just cut out all the noise and go right to the storytelling? Can't the storytelling unite us as a community? So initially, that was the motive, is that we could tell a Miami story that I'd never seen before. Because growing up in Miami, in the neighborhood I grew up in, Liberty City wasn't part of my experience. And I'd heard things, but I was very curious in knowing what Miami looked like for people who had a different experience. I wanted to understand my city through storytelling.
And so you were a producer on Moonlight. Look back at the production of that. I mean, what stands out about making the film?
I mean, a couple of things. That movie, what was so fascinating about that movie is basically one piece built on the other, right? Like, it started small, like, "Hey, here's a play Terrell wrote, and hey, Barry, have you guys met? You should probably meet and talk about this." And and then it just starts getting bigger, and all of a sudden, somehow Brad Pitt is involved, and you're like, how did we get from A to B? And you're then suddenly A24, right at this incredible moment for them as a company, comes in, and suddenly we're making it, and suddenly it's not a backyard production. Mahershala Ali, Naomi Harris, like, oh my goodness, Jenna Monet, like, all of a sudden it just kept getting bigger. The thing that stands out to me is that we were still an incredibly small movie. I think in hindsight, people look at that film and see it a certain way, but on the ground, we were a very small boat.
Right.
I don't know if this is a badge of honor, but we are the lowest budgeted film ever to win that award. I don't know Parasite's budget, but I still think we hold that. I still think we were the lowest budget film ever win Best Picture, which meant it was a grind. It was an independent film production, meaning you are doing more with less.
So then fast forward through production, and it's released in the Oscars, February 26, 2017. After winning Best Drama at the Golden Globes, Moonlight is nominated for a number of categories, most notably, obviously, Best Picture. And everybody knows the story. La La Land gets announced as the winner, only to be told it was a mistake, and the Best Picture actually went to Moonlight. You were there. Take us through that moment and that night and what that whole thing was like.
It was really incredible to be there. I think when Terrell and Barry won Best Adapted Screenplay, that was extraordinary. That was the victory. Mahershala winning Best Supporting Actor, winning Best Supporting Screenplay. Those were the things we thought we'd win, and those are the things I was super proud of. I was super proud of the fact that Terrell and Barry won, because that was the thing that I did unequivocally on the movie, was say, "Hey, Barry, Terrell, you guys should meet and talk. I think you two would make something wonderful together." And then they won an Oscar for it. You're like, all right, I'm out. I can go home. We're never going to win. La La Land is totally going to clean up. They've been steamrolling the night. I wish Nat Sanders and Joy McMillan, our editors, I wish James Laxton, who shot a beautiful movie, but you know what? I can go home happy. This is a victory. And the expectation was that La La Land would win. So when it did, that was confirming the expectation. When it didn't, that was upending not only the moment that had just occurred, but upending the preparation you do going into this, because you don't want to get your hopes up and only be disappointed.
Yep.
So total confusion. Like what was happening, why it was happening, it did not process. It was so clearly off script that it took a lot of time for it to process. And by a lot of time, I mean several hours after the event, at the after party. It's like, hey, wait a minute, I think that really happened. Incredibly disorienting. I don't know. It was such a fun night, but it would have been different had it gone according to plan. You know what I mean? Without the mix up, the mood would have been very different.
Well, I remember seeing a still photo afterwards, and now knowing who you are, and now looking back at that photo, the look on your face was very disoriented. I mean, and of course,
the look on my face was me saying, just be cool, man, just be cool. So there's a video. There was a screening of the Academy Awards at the African Heritage Community Arts Center in Liberty City. They held a public screening of Moonlight, and the Heritage Center was a big supporter and hub for us making the movie. Not only were they stood in for a physical location, they were also like a major community center that helped bring Terrell into art as a young man growing up in Liberty City. So the community center, was a big part of our production. We based out of there. We held auditions out of there. They would recommend crew and people. Like, they were awesome. And they held an Academy Award viewing party when Moonlight was there. And I've seen footage of the moment they announced La La Land, and then they reverse course and announced Moonlight. And I've seen that. So this whole community of people who helped us make the movie, the community that we were targeting when we made the movie, watching this moment happen, and the moment they announced Barry, everybody just, like, the amount of Moonlight Barry's up on the stage, everyone just starts screaming and celebrating and cheering and banging pots and pans, and like the camera goes nuts. And it is the moment, like, Hollywood was there, and it was incredible. And hey, and I talked to John Hamm. But the moment that mattered, the video that for me really grounds the experience and just sort of connects the reason we did it at all, is the moment where that community center just erupts in applause, because it was a small movie about a community for a community to build a community, and that's proof that it works. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that all comes full circle when 2 months later, the city of Miami named the street outside the community center after the movie. It's Moonlight Way now,
right,
for like 2 blocks. Like, that's it. Like, I did not think, so if the question was, what did I think of Moonlight later? Did I think they'd name a street after us? No, but was that kind of the goal? Yes.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And then after Moonlight, though, you were the executive producer on a TV series called Grown, which is set in Miami. Talk about that.
Oh, great. So Edson Jean and Joshua Jean Baptiste are 2 South Florida filmmakers who are a creative powerhouse. They're amazing. They're both Haitian American. He was a friend of mine who I called when we were doing the movie, when we were doing Moonlight, because I needed, like, basically it was like, we're doing readings. We need kids to come in and they would read scripts, and we're trying to find actors, and I needed an actor to read opposite them, and it wasn't going to be us. So, I had other stuff to do. So I called Edson. I was like, Edson, I need a favor. Can you come in and be my actor? And Edson was around to help, and he was telling me about this project he was working on while he would come on and help us. Edson ended up getting cast. Barry loved him and was like, oh, he's great. Like, why isn't he in the movie? So he cast him in, and he plays Mr. Pierce, the teacher in the second story. But so while Edson's on set, while Edson's helping out, Edson's just telling me about this project he has, which is this incredible TV series that he has written, the entire series. It's a 10-episode thing with Joshua, his creative partner. They've written this whole project, and he's trying to get it made. I love that he's got this drive. He's doing it. He's not waiting. He didn't wait for someone to pay him to do it. He just wrote the whole thing. So he'd be like, no, here's my TV series. This is all 10 seasons. Give me the money. I'll go make it. And it's a fascinating story about growing up, Haitian American in South Florida. And Edson and Josh would be the main actors. And it's this whole Good Will Hunting, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck thing. they're going to write their ticket in and they're going to act in it. And Edson's a filmmaker, so he can direct it. Like, he's got the whole thing. He just needed to figure out how to put it together. And I remember telling him that he should focus, like, this is 2000, when is this, 2014? I was like, the web series is a thing. People are putting money into that space. You should look into that. And he's like, no, I'm making a TV show. I'm like, no, you should look at, like, the internet. This is a thing now. And the movie wraps. I actually leave Miami and move to Hong Kong for a year, which is maybe more complicated than you need. But I moved to Hong Kong, and I said, Edson, look at the internet. And on my way to Hong Kong, I see a competition. Do you remember Project Greenlight, the HBO series?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Project Greenlight has, at this point, migrated to the internet, and they are looking to build the new web series. And they have a competition. Send in your thing, you'll win, enough money to shoot your little pilot, and it'll be a cute little project. Maybe that's too dismissive, but the idea is they're offering a competition. They'll give you money. You get to make a pilot for a web series. And I see the link, and I send it to Edson and peace out, get on my plane, and fly away. A couple of months later, I get an email from Edson that says, hey, I applied, sent in my TV show, and won. Wow. Now I got to figure out what to do because they're only offering me like web series pilot money, and I've got a proper Showtime series. And I say, well, Edson, send me the thing, and I read it, and it's this 400, how many, 10 episodes, 40 minutes an episode. It's like a 400 or 500 page opus. He's written like a massive TV show that requires massive amount of resources, but it's glorious. It's an incredible read. He says, hey, so I won the thing. So what do you think I should do? I was like, well, I think you should probably write this for 2 characters in a room because that's all the money they're giving him. And he goes, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to take care of it. So good luck. The next phone call I get from him is, okay, so I flew to LA, I went into the company, and I said, hey, listen, I don't want $6 to make this. I need a real budget. And they said, okay. And they're going to go help him sell it.
Wow.
I said, Edson, that's amazing. Like, okay, like, keep me posted. I still live in Hong Kong. My year in Hong Kong ends. I come back to the U.S. and he says, hey, guess what? They gave me all the money. I'm going to go make it. Complex, the urban wear men's magazine, like, they're going to invest a bunch of money and we're going to make a TV show. Do you want to produce it? He said, because you've been doing all this work remotely anyway, you might as well be the guy who helps me get it made.
Sure.
So I jumped on because, one, Edson's a rocket ship and the story is amazing and it's 100% in line with building community through art, and it's a South Florida story about a community I didn't know anything about. It's like it checked all the boxes. I loved it, and a filmmaker who I think is doing interesting and incredible things. So it was my first job after the Oscars. Basically, I walked off the Oscar stage into the interview and then moved back to Miami to produce the show.
And then you mentioned Hong Kong, which I think ties into my next question, is about your most recent project, which is a documentary called Leave the Bus Through the Broken Window. It's quite the project, and I feel like I would do a disservice if I tried to summarize what it is. So share everything about it.
I apologize for how every story involves I have to like kick back 5 years and then catch you up to speed.
No, that's good.
So in 2011, I had won a grant from the Knight Foundation to make a documentary about Art Basel Miami Beach and its impact on Miami's art community. And that's a documentary called Rising Tide, a story of Miami artists. And that film played on WLRN Channel 17, was nationally syndicated through the public television networks, and was a ground level look at what it meant to be an artist in 2011 with this incredible cultural boom, because it's undeniable that when Basel showed up, it was a massive creative catalyst for Miami's community. The PAM rebuilt and moved, the investment, the art collections set up, the Margulies Rubel, they all got bigger and more patrons, and investment came in, and artists who would have left didn't, decided to stay. Miami now has a proper cultural calendar and is a place where artists can live and thrive, and Miami as a town is becoming more cognizant and aware, and art is becoming part of that identity. And I thought that was fascinating, made a movie about it. Movie did fine. We actually won some regional awards for it. So it followed a passion of mine too, which is sort of community art and sort of how they intersect. So in 2014, I am in grad school. I'd moved to New York to go to Fordham to study in a new business program. And I had applied for a grant with a Fulbright, a William J. Fulbright fellowship which is a year abroad to execute a project if you're sort of devising. And what I proposed was a documentary about Art Basel Hong Kong and the way it was impacting Hong Kong's local art community. Because that fair had only just arrived. I figured I'd be early, and I could make a similar movie asking those same questions. And I wanted to compare how would Hong Kong be different than Miami, but I imagined there would be a lot of similarities. Young art community, the big fair, how's it affecting local artists? So I won that grant. We produced Moonlight, and 2 weeks after Moonlight wrapped production, I told Edson to go apply to this contest and then flew to Hong Kong to go make this documentary about art. I get to Hong Kong and realize three things. First thing is that the conversation that I think I'm going to make this movie about has already happened. Hong Kong already addressed it. They have locals who know what they're doing, who understand the community, and they've been having the conversation openly and publicly in a way that Miami was having it when I was making the movie. Hong Kong had already had it. I'm late to the party. So my movie's not relevant. Two, I don't know anything about Hong Kong. I don't know anything about Hong Kong. I don't speak the language. I mean, like, everyone speaks English, but like, English is a primary language. But I don't speak Cantonese, and believe it or not, a lot of local community-based art is about Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese, Cantonese. It's about language. There was one piece, this seems actually in the movie, where the piece is about the subtle nuances between a Mandarin phrase and a Cantonese phrase as it relates to childhood. I don't speak either one of those languages, let alone the subtle nuances in pronunciation. So I am completely out of my depth when it comes to having any sort of expertise or authority. The third thing I realized is that if I try to make the movie that I proposed, it will be terrible because I am ill-equipped, underprepared, inappropriate, and late. So instead of making that movie, the bad version of the movie I proposed, I made the version of the movie that I have always wanted to make that no one ever would have given me a grant for. I figured it was too late. I'm already here. They're not gonna send me home. They're not gonna make me pay them back as long as I deliver a thing I promised I'd deliver. Who's to say this isn't the film that I proposed? So instead of making a bad movie about Hong Kong's art community, I made a movie about my failure to make a movie about Hong Kong's art community. So the way I pitched the film is that Leave the Bus Through the Broken Window is a film about the time I went to Hong Kong to make a film about art, but got lost in a shopping mall. So instead made a film about my feelings.
And what has the response been?
So that film premiered at South by Southwest last year, and then went on to play CPH Docs in Copenhagen. We played BAM Cinema Fest. We did the Southern Circuit Tour. We've played in a number of places here and abroad. It is written up in the magazines that I always wanted to be written up in. Like, it's been extraordinary how many people responded to my weird little movie about my existential crisis. It's been wonderful.
And so, Andrew, what's next?
Well, so currently I live in Los Angeles. I work with a company called Fabula, which is the director Pablo Larraín. And his company, he and his brother Juan de Dios Larraín, have opened an American branch of their sort of storied and established Latin American production company. We do film and TV, both in English and in Spanish, which feels very Miami to me, frankly. And in that capacity, I'm working on films and TV in a fun, exciting establishment, kind of like Hollywood kind of way. In the local front, I have helped with the Moonlight organization. We've launched a micro-budget film residency. We are now in our second year. Every year we offer two scholarships of $50,000 for local Miami filmmakers to make a feature film. The idea is not seed funding or finishing funding. That is your all-in budget. You have to deliver your movie for $50,000 or less. When I look at Barry Jenkins, who made Medicine for Melancholy, for $15,000. When I look at Amy Seimetz, who made Sun Don't Shine, for $40,000 in Tampa. When I look at the Safdie brothers, who before they did Good Time, before they did Uncut Gems, did The Pleasure of Being Robbed with stolen equipment, I think that's the step that's missing and what Miami needs to graduate from, a place that makes great short filmmakers into a place that makes great feature filmmakers. Mm-hmm. So we have gone through 2 years of that. Edson Jean of Grown in the web series is currently one of our fellows. He's already completed production on his film. Farron Humes, who made an incredible film called Liberty, which won Berlinale, and a short film for Berlinale in South by Southwest last year. She is another fellow. So community-based, still focused on the idea that you can build community through art, that it's not about sort of the size of your budget. It's more about what you're trying to do with it. That's all definitely part of my my life. And then on the personal filmmaking front, I'm actually at work on a sequel to Leave the Bus called Loneliness is a Traveling Partner, which is a story of historical family trauma and romantic love.
So you're staying plenty busy.
I'm doing my best.
I really appreciate you making time in your schedule to talk with us today. Andrew, thanks for being on the Film Florida podcast.
Delighted to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at teespring.com/stores/Film Florida, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.